So the idea of this session is to get your inputs on, as I said, what we should be doing as a component and what our research priorities should be. So I'll not go through the details of how we do this, but basically our current work and future plans are to identify these research priorities, stimulate research in these topics. And we also already had some questions about things which perhaps aren't included in the priority topics. And we want to build the R&D community. We had this discussion point about engaging with developing country researchers. So we'd like to get your thoughts on that. Maybe I can just open the floor in case anyone would like to speak up now before we go to the next. I think you can all, as I understand, you can all unmute your microphone and stuff in case anyone's got something to say, a comment before I go on. Gorg Harpenter, yeah.
Yeah, there's a hand up, exactly.
Yeah. Yes. Hello. Nice to see you again.
Hi.
I have one question. I mean, one of the issues that came up was about why aren't there more first authors on research publications from the developing countries, and I think one of the big reasons is that funding has not, or at least when I worked on this, there was very little funding for cooperation between partners of Europe or America and those developing countries. It was always a question of that we had to find money from the EU, from ESA, and then of course there was no strong long-term cooperation. Is there any changes? Is there any opportunity for building up a long-term research to get this going? Because I think that's the main point why there is not so much happening.
Yeah. Martin, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And I mean, we all know in the research world, it's kind of projects. It's you know, you apply for something, and then there's a certain lifetime to that, and then there's a certain ending to that, and then of course you build partnerships and networks to reply to certain calls and certain objectives and so on. So that's kind of the nature of how research goes. The long term, the bit more longer term thing, of course, but I'm not saying the funding structure is changing. It's because I mean the need of countries for R&D to improve, maintain, and sustain their national systems and to work with the experts they have in the countries, that is a long-term task. And I think that's going to be a bit the trick to try to, how can these two things be aligned to help countries to do what they need to do, although it might only be for 3 years, but that it also stimulates research and maybe some of the longer-term research in the countries. And then maybe the countries themselves, through their universities, through their experts, can are able to maintain these in-country works. So that's one of the ways where I think the need should be there. I mean, maybe there are some longer-term programs. I mean, Red Plus by itself is a long-term program, but also these long-term support programs through Norway. I think Copernicus, right, has long-term objectives, and Copernicus is, of course, looking at services, and I think is the process of launching a global forest monitoring service, but in parallel also has a particular focus on R&D, not only for the purpose of evolving their own service, but also for really improving the partnerships and the links with countries. And that's also where I see perhaps some things can be somewhat different than in the past. But in general, the issue is there. I think it's not necessarily new. It was also interesting that for some countries like Indonesia or Brazil, Mexico, you have quite a bit of first author paper. So it's not that it's an exclusive thing. But for example, particularly if we look at Africa, for example, we see that is really an issue. So there may be some of the things that just mentioned can help to improve that.
Yeah, and maybe that's something we need to highlight, the benefits of having country experts involved in these research projects, and in other projects where country experts are involved, where research isn't the main output, perhaps we can incentivize those projects to deliver peer-reviewed papers as one of the outcomes, as well as project reports and other things which are, you know, more typical of these kind of projects. So I think there are definitely opportunities. Yeah. Any other questions before we move on? So I'll go to the priority activities, which were kind of discussed in the presentation which I just gave. So the activities which we are doing at the moment and which we expect to do in future are these expert meetings to assess progress on key research topics, these literature reviews to identify relevant new research, production of new guidance materials, these calm assessments of new research to understand their progress towards operationality, direct support to countries on R&D topics. Maybe this is working together on research projects, and also advocating key research needs to donors and other project developers. So what I'm suggesting we do now is we ask for your thoughts on what would be the main priorities. And I'm going to switch my screen. I just have to make sure the right screen is there. Sorry, I'm looking for my, there we go. So you should be able to see a Mentimeter presentation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to present. And what this means is if you open a browser on your computer or you open a browser on your phone, go to menti.com. So that's www.menti.com. And then you'll be asked to input a code, and the code is the one shown at the top of this screen.
Yeah, I also just put it in the chat.
Okay, yeah. Then you should be able to see the questions and everyone can vote. So I can go to, first of all, we didn't really do introductions, so it would be nice to know a bit about who is in the session. So maybe you can tell us which tropical country or region or ecozone you work on, or which country you represent, if you are representing a particular tropical country. And you should be able to see now in your browser this question. And you can just write it. Yeah, okay. Just to see which areas we've got covered. Okay, so I see Asia, Latin America, Africa in there. Nice, pantropical. Okay. Yeah, a few more countries coming in. Indonesia is popping out as usual. Nice to see. So the bigger the word, the more people who are writing that particular word. Okay, that's nice. Good to see that we have all the areas covered of the tropics. I'm going to go to the next slide. So this is about the question that I just asked about R&D component activities, and which do you think are the three most important? Maybe they're all important, but just out of interest, are there any that really pop out to you as being, yes, this is, you know, if time is short, the R&D component has to make selections on what we spend more time on. What would you recommend that we focus on? Okay. So there are a couple of things which are coming out as being more important. Yeah, so looks like most people have voted. If anyone's having difficulty with Mentimeter, let us know in the chat. Or is everyone managing that? Okay. So it looks like this linking with developing countries to work on R&D topics, maybe to develop new research, to demonstrate it in those countries. Those are the kind of things which we can focus on. Advocating key research needs towards donors, I think that's always important. And then the others, yeah, more or less similar. Anyone want to say anything on those selections, or is there something missing that we've missed out that we should be doing?
Yeah, seems to me that at least all of these things are somewhat important. There's not one that really falls back and people say, well, that's not really what we need to be doing. Yeah, but yeah, I'm also curious if people think like there's something else that as an R&D coordination effort that one should do as a kind of a broad category of activities.
Any kind of activities that we could do to help engage the research community better? We have these expert meetings. We mentioned that we're present at conferences. I don't know if there's something else that we can do to kind of make sure we reach out to people better. I think one of the things from the pandemic is the ability to have more things online and to engage with people more easily than having, you know, just a few people fly to a meeting. So maybe that's one thing that we can sort of prioritize in future, these inclusive open meetings.
Yeah. I think there's some comments in the chat also. I think there's Melvin Lipper who made the point that it really depends on the stakeholders, and it's true. I mean, I would say in the GFOI context, at the end, the stakeholder is the country experts who are supposed to do the national forest monitoring for their own countries and feed that into greenhouse gas inventories and so on. Although for the R&D coordination component, of course, it is to connect research and coordinate research towards these, and that of course includes then other stakeholders as well, such as the capacity development agencies, FAO, the people funding, you know, World Bank, and who funding these kind of things. I think that's clear. And then I guess I think that was also what Sarah was showing a bit in these kind of the broadness of the R&D component contributes to is really, you know, starting with country needs, but then really work with these various stakeholders. But at the end, it's for the countries. I think Jörg made the point again about this more money directed to a collaboration and really collaborative research. I think I agree. It's still too one directional. So I think that's a very important point. So in advocating new research, I think that's important. There was also something. And then the awareness raising, I think Javier is making that point. I think that's a very good point. I mean, we try to be present and in the various things. And let's be honest, the whole R&D research network, where we had these various expert meetings, we've been present. It has been struggling over the pandemic, and we hope that this can be rebuilt. I think then also Helmut had a point. And then a well-targeted guidance and promotion for the R&D priorities would be helpful. I think that's a very important point. That's related to the last point, which has 14 votes on advocating key research. That's one of the reasons we're doing it. We're trying to understand from the countries what are their needs, and then for GFOI to say these are the priorities, and that donor agencies actually are aware of them and actually can fund dedicated research. GFOI itself does not fund research; it's just coordinating it. So, and I think that's also something we probably need to be more active on. That the donors, those who are in a position to fund research, they are aware of these priorities and can actually pick them up. So that's a very important point, and let's make that also very maybe even a stronger point moving moving forward. And then we have Fiona, so that's CSOs. Yeah, they are not too busy. I mean, everybody is of course busy. I mean, we all know in these, let's say, forest climate change mitigation that the civil society has a big role to play in, I mean, in the implementation, in the advocacy, and so on. There are probably there's also some engagement with research, and if people have good ideas on how these links can be established further, we're thinking about maybe transdisciplinary research, you know, with communities, with local communities, forest communities, with NGOs, and with various societal groups. I think that would also be appreciated. This is a quick rundown. Thanks for all the good comments.
Yeah, nice. We're going to make a note of all these comments and take them into consideration for our future plans. So I'm going to move to the next part now. So this is really diving into the details, but it would be nice if you could give us some feedback on the R&D gaps that we've identified. Just to give you the opportunity. So basically these priority themes came out from the systematic literature review, where we looked at all the research on tropical forest monitoring and we put them into these categories. And it would be nice to know if you think, okay, because we know how many papers are published on each category. If you could tell us what you think are the 5 most important priority themes, and then we can see whether these link to the actual amount of research which we found in our literature review. So you can, I think you should see the option now, and you can pick the 5 topics. It's perhaps difficult to just pick 5 because I think a lot, they're all useful and a lot of them are complementary as well. So, you know, you have something like forest biomass, and then understanding the uncertainty or accuracy of that map is important. So maybe you need both. But anyway, we're asking you to choose just to get some feedback. Yeah, and maybe if anyone has any comments, you can put them in the chat, you know, on what you think if there's some tropical forest monitoring theme that you think is under researched. Yeah, okay.
Thanks, and it's good to see that people are making choices. At the end, that's always a question that comes up, what are the priorities? So at some point we'll have to narrow a list down from 15 to 5 or something like that, maybe even to 1 or 2. So it's good to see some patterns emerging. Seems like there's a lot of interest and, or you know, recognition of importance for forest degradation, forest regrowth. I see also then forest biomass and uncertainty assessments are showing up. So and Sarah, what do you think? I mean, from the previous workshop, I would, without not having done a quantitative analysis, but it seems like there is quite some similarity there with what we've seen also in the previous workshop.
Yeah, I would need to look, but I think you're right. I seem to recall that this degradation regrowth issue has always been a top one, and is something which is challenging across the tropics as well. That's another thing.
And that's actually an interesting point by Javier. So one person has been voting for methods and tools as other, and that's a bit of a category where we, you know, from the review point of view, lumped a few things together. So if the person who, you know, chose that could maybe even in the chat or speak up what other method he or she had in mind. And maybe that's what Maria Nutinen said. It's because she's saying that moving towards more of a landscape approach, so much more of a holistic view on than just forests. I think that's a fair point. So if I interpret that correctly, so Maria, you've been the one with methods and tools and others, and it's this landscape approach, I think, that you're putting forward, if I interpret that right. But it's definitely something that is not there, so the landscapes in this broader perspective.
Yeah.
Also in terms of monitoring, I guess there's a little bit of a relationship to land use management and sustainability, but also again, I think that it's very forest focus indeed. Okay, and Maria outed herself, so thanks, Maria, for for responding so quickly. Great.
Okay, good. Well, again, we'll take note of this, compare it to our other session and the results we got, and just make sure we take this into consideration moving forward. I'm going to go to the next session, the next slide. And what we did here is we selected, some of these are kind of grouped together. So we put degradation and regrowth together as one point. As an R&D component, we selected what we thought should be the 5 broad topics which we can focus on a little bit. And this was partially out of time because we were holding a workshop to look at research priorities, and we couldn't organize sessions to look at everything. So we decided to organize 5 sessions, and we wonder what you think is the priority from these 5 now. Okay, interesting. And once you've voted on this, I'm going to show you the results from the workshop that we had, where we gathered together experts on each of these 5 themes. And we had a number of experts in each theme who presented what they thought their research priorities would be. So we had, in some cases, 7, 8 experts. And then we asked them to decide, along with participants, it was an open workshop, which were the top 3 priorities in each of those. So they had to really whittle down from, you know, everyone's suggestions to just 3 priorities in these topics. And I'd like to get your input on what they chose. You can vote, you'll see in the next slides, but maybe just some comments on, you know, what we came up with. So I'll go to that. It looks like most people have voted. Maybe some comments on this before we move on, but there's, yeah, a clear selection of degradation and regrowth as the top, I think. So similar to before.
Yeah, I think it's.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Again, this is very in depth, but we really want to show you the kind of detail that we went into when we looked at these research priorities. So feel free to vote on what your priorities are. You can choose all 3, but this is what we came up with, or the experts came up with in the biomass session. Is this something that resonates with you? Do you have any comments on that? And we already had some discussion on the geotrees. So, you know, this project which links the ground data with the satellite data. So we had a bit of discussion on these estimates already. Yeah, some of these are a little bit special interest. If your work isn't specifically on biomass, you might not have a real preference here, I guess. So are there any comments in the chat on that? I'm not really reading the chat. Are you, wait. Okay, so on the last thing, early warning that came out last was a bit of a surprise. Okay.
For some reason, where did my Zoom meeting go? Ah, there. Okay.
Tipping points, early warning. Okay. Noted. Yeah. I mean, we chose it as one of our 5 priorities because we saw the unnatural disturbance. So this is related to the biomass. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, identifying natural change over disturbed anthropogenic disturbances as well. Okay, should I move to the next one? I think if no one has any specific comments on the biomass, degradation and regrowth was the next one we had, and these are the top three topics that we came up with. So maybe this comment on natural disturbance kind of comes up in this degradation and regrowth. So it's more or less captured here. Okay. Interesting comment in the chat about early warning. Would you like to say something on this? I can't see who wrote it.
I think it's Muri.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's Muri. No, that's just what I wrote. I mean, in our experience in Mozambique, most of our deforestation is for subsistence farming, so it's not illegal. Even in protected areas, it's not technically illegal because if it's for subsistence farming. But for us, protected areas would maybe be a case where early warning could be useful. But then you need to have the means to act on those warnings, and so it requires funds and yeah. For our case, we don't see that much other than an initial phase of testing early warnings with some additional finance, but we're more interested in generating statistics. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. And then I see the comment on evaluating all these different degradation definitions. Okay. Let's move on to the next one. Well, early warning. We had 3 potential priorities for early warning.
Oh, that's a tight race here.
Yeah. Anyone for any more comments on early warning? Otherwise, I can move to the next topic.
I think the point of Muri comes back here. It's related to the last point. So I mean, alerts need a way to be picked up and followed up. I think that's very important in the right context.
Yeah, yeah. And I can see that different countries in different stages have their priorities, and sometimes that's not it. Okay, so I'll move. Then we had this uncertainty topic. What was interesting is that uncertainty often came up in the other topics. For example, in the biomass, then the uncertainty came up, and so on. But we had a specific category for this because it really came out from these country needs assessments and so on. Yeah, and I can see that this hands-on advice to countries, the third point is coming up a bit more. Yeah. All right, we're getting through our 5 main topics. Just put a comment in the chat if you have a specific comment on this, or raise your hand or speak up. Otherwise, I can move to the next one, but it seems like they've leveled out a bit. Oh. Oh yeah, this is, yeah, this is now on land use and greenhouse gases, the 3 priorities. Yeah, and they're all coming out as being important. I think our selection of the priorities is going to be a challenge. If there are no comments, I think I'll move shortly on to the next one. Everyone's had the chance to vote. Any comments, Martin, on this, or not?
No, I mean, yeah, it's also quite tight. I mean, it's basically there's nothing really sticking out. But okay, I mean, they're all important. I mean, they're already identified as priorities out of a longer list, so perhaps it's not too surprising. But it's good to have some reassurance. And yeah, in some cases we actually do see some things, being more relevant than others, at least to what people think here that are here on the call. And it's nice, we are almost 40 people, so I think that's a good representation of what people think.
Yeah, good. So yeah, thanks for voting. And there's just one more question. What other research priorities should be? Because, and I'll just give some examples, although maybe not to prime you, but during our last workshop, some other ideas came up, like focusing on difficult to monitor ecosystems. So you can think beyond just the kind of categories that we've proposed to other research priorities that you may think are there. And I think these are also useful to take into consideration. So feel free to just type something.
And that, Maria, that would be the moment to put also the landscape approach, for example.
Yeah.
just as a stimulation.
And it's true, if we'd asked for one choice in the research priorities, we would have got some different outputs. But yeah. We felt it was too difficult to choose, so didn't want to limit, but yeah, you're right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so some specific technologies, indeed, and use of those. Okay. Okay, some interesting incorporation of AI. Yeah. Yeah. Some new ideas that we didn't get from the last workshop. So that's nice to see, actually. Yeah, and of course, this country-led research idea. Yeah, that's definitely something we're going to focus on. Monte Carlo. Oh, yeah. And would anyone like to give any explanation about why you've put something in this? Explain your thoughts. Advocate your idea. If not, and if you have any other idea, oh, sorry, go on, Martin.
No, I just it's nice to see. I think there's definitely some new ideas there, some reoccurring themes, but also some new ideas, which is really nice.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll take note of all these. And if you think of something after the session that you wish you'd said, please just feel free to email either myself or Martin, because we'd love to hear your ideas. So if I remember rightly, that's the last, the end of the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So one of the other reasons for this, so not just discussing the activities and the research priorities that the R&D component does, but it's to discuss a bit how it's organized. And you might have noticed that a number of the other components talked about, for example, resourcing or metrics for success. So I have a couple of slides on those comments, and yeah, we can just, I think there's just 4 slides actually, so it's fairly short. But if I share them, then it's just so that we give you the opportunity to comment on basically our plans, how it's been in the past, and whether you think we should be doing things differently. So I'm just going to share my screen again. Okay, you should be able to see the presentation mode. Yeah. Okay, so in terms of resourcing, basically we rely a lot on the in-kind contributions of researchers and experts. and often they work to host workshops, but are there any other ideas for how we should resource ourselves, how we can increase participation for those people who struggle with this structure? I think we don't really see another solution, but comments on this are welcome.
Yeah, I mean, basically the model has been that it is largely also a best efforts thing, and it has worked in times where there's a lot of community interest to really get together, to work together, and so on. I think that's important that we keep it that way, but it really relies also from different people working together and contributing. And so if people have good ideas or suggestions, or perhaps like to contribute more actively, then we're happy to hear about it.
Yeah, and I think these in-kind contributions have tended to come from relevant projects. So if you're involved in a relevant project that has a funding source that you think could benefit with a collaboration with some of the GFOI R&D community, then you can discuss with us how we might be involved in such an initiative, or maybe your findings can feed into our plans and so on. One thing just to highlight again exactly who these partners are. So of course Wageningen University, I mentioned, through our projects that are ongoing, are funding the component essentially as such. European Space Agency have previously directly funded the component, and of course mainly from the leads and partners of GFOI, so Silver Carbon, World Bank, FAO Norway, BC3. They've hosted workshops, sent their researchers to expert meetings, and then of course we've had links with other researchers and teams and experts who have contributed. So is there anything that we're missing, any people that we should be involving who could contribute?
Just a comment. I don't see here particularly an explicit mention to possible groups that are working on machine learning, but maybe they're integrated into these researchers and their teams, component activities, etc. But yeah, maybe I don't know if there are plans to expand the network somehow, or I know it is already a very big one.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's a good point. And can you just introduce, I didn't catch who spoke there. Can you just, oh, that's Javier. Okay, I see you now. And so you're from which country or organization are you from?
FAO.
FAO, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, we've had these kind of research teams that we've worked with who have worked on specific themes, but I mean, basically our network is kind of open. So a researcher who's an expert in machine learning or whatever, it's good if you just make yourself known to us. And then when we hold an expert meeting, we can get in touch. Maybe if you have relevant research that you'd like putting through the CALM framework that you'd like to inform us about, that's also, you know, how we might become aware of the prominent research which is coming up. So other than kind of get in touch, I can't really suggest anything. What are your thoughts, Martin, on?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the research is also to have, or R&D coordination component is also to have a bit of an explanatory role, because I mean, of course, countries and country experts that might not know much about machine learning, deep learning, some of the AI type activities, but they hear about it and they even get approached about it. And I think it would be also important for the component to explain a bit what's now becoming available, what's possible, and eventually what could be actually approaches that could be picked up by countries. And I think to do that, and that's always an ongoing discussion, how some of these advanced technologies can actually prove. And there, indeed, we do have systems like the SAPAL platform. We have these ways how countries can tap into these resources if they want to. And I think that's also an important part of the message that, yes, what is the state of research for that purpose? What demonstrations have been done? And if a country would go into how would go about it, how it can be done in a way that it can also be practically done or ideally sustainably done for the country.
Can I say something to that?
Yes.
Yes, so hello, I'm Marco, and actually I agree on that part that it's also important that you give some good opportunities or that it's easy for machine learning experts to get this data, because actually I am from the German Research Center of Artificial Intelligence. So I am actually trying to look now for topics or application on where I can apply machine learning on it.
Yeah, and so what do you, I mean, what's the, I mean, can you elaborate a bit further? That's a bit the point. I mean, there's one end, there's machine learning and deep learning, and these are methods, and we have seen in research that it can be useful for certain, you know, for certain aspects that we're talking about here, right? So what do you think is still missing?
Well, unfortunately, I'm really from the machine learning deep learning side and haven't done much work in the forestry part. I'm still looking into if I can do something. So here I'm still trying, I'm on the lookout for topics, let's say.
Yeah. Okay.
Or what kind of problems you have and are trying to solve, and where I could basically help you with my knowledge.
And I mean, hopefully a little bit when we walk through all these R&D topics, but that were in part very detailed in terms of uncertainty estimation, in terms of biomass change, land use, you know, all these things. I mean, that should have given you a little bit of a flavor on what are the areas where the research priorities are. And I mean, and I guess if you want to go into even more detail, then I think that's a discussion that you can have afterwards. That goes into a lot of detail, I think.
Yeah, but it's true. The priorities definitely gave a good idea about what is currently going on.
Yeah, and then I mean, one thing is the research itself, and the second point, I think that's also that one. I think what Javier was a bit saying is like that if it's useful, how can it be end up all the way by, you know, in the hand of countries at some point? And like I said, I mean, countries are now quite acquainted with using satellite time series data, using advanced approaches, accessing the very high resolution data that Norway is basically funding to be free and open for countries.
Just to interrupt, Martin, I see that the breakout room will close in 10 seconds.
Sorry about that.
I just saw that it pop up. So we're going to, please stay in touch with us, send us an email, but we're going to go back